Tyler Blackwood stared at the corporate boardroom table, 19 years old, with 2.3 billion reasons to prove himself, and 30 days to do it. His mother hadn't taken a single step in 18 months. 3 expensive physical therapists had failed. The company board wanted measurable results, or they'd strip his voting control. What he didn't know was that the quiet woman who'd been cleaning their Buckhead mansion for 2 years used to choreograph for artists whose names were carved into the walls of the Atlanta music scene. The ultimatum came on a Tuesday morning, while MARTA trains hummed past the high-rise windows of Blackwood Technologies. Tyler had inherited the company 8 months earlier when his father's heart attack turned a routine board meeting into a funeral planning session. Now the same executives who'd smiled through his father's memorial were demanding proof that the kid could handle more than stock options and trust fund distributions. Leadership through measurable outcomes, his Uncle Robert had said, adjusting his tie with the precision of a man who'd been waiting decades for this moment. Your mother's condition has plateaued. The family is spending $15,000 monthly on care with no improvement. Show us you can manage a real crisis, not just delegate it to specialists. Tyler drove his Audi through the winding streets of Buckhead that afternoon, past the manicured lawns and security gates that had shaped his entire world. He'd grown up assuming problems solved themselves if you threw enough money at them. 3 different physical therapists had confirmed what the doctors at Emory had told him after his mother's stroke. Severe spasticity in both legs, cognitive function intact, prognosis for walking independently somewhere between unlikely and impossible. The house felt different when he walked through the front door, with 30 days hanging over his head. Carmen was in the kitchen, the same woman who'd been showing up 3 times a week since before his father died, moving through the space with the kind of efficiency that comes from understanding exactly how things should work. She was maybe 35, 40 at most, with hands that seemed to know where everything belonged and a way of talking to his mother that the expensive healthcare workers never quite managed. His mother sat in her wheelchair near the living room windows, staring out at the garden she used to tend herself. The stroke had taken her legs, but left her mind sharp enough to understand exactly what she'd lost. Tyler had learned to read her moods in the tightness around her eyes, the way her fingers drummed against the wheelchair arms when she was frustrated, which was most of the time lately. "The new therapist is coming Thursday," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "Dr. Martinez recommended him, specializes in post-stroke mobility." His mother's fingers stopped drumming. She turned to look at him with the expression she'd perfected over 18 months of watching strangers poke and stretch and evaluate her like she was a piece of equipment that needed fixing. "How many specialists does that make?" she asked, her voice carrying the edge that came whenever the subject turned to her care. "This one's different. He's worked with athletes, people who needed to rebuild everything from scratch." She looked back toward the garden. "Athletes who chose their injuries." From the kitchen came the sound of Carmen loading the dishwasher, the quiet rhythm of plates and glasses finding their places. It was a sound that had become part of the house's daily soundtrack, barely noticed until Tyler started paying attention. She moved like someone who'd learned to be invisible, but there was something in her posture that didn't match the stereotype of domestic help his mother's friends employed. That evening, Tyler sat in his father's study, surrounded by medical reports and insurance documents, trying to make sense of 18 months of failed treatments. The first therapist had focused on passive range of motion exercises, moving his mother's legs through prescribed patterns while she lay still as a mannequin. The second had brought expensive electrical stimulation equipment that made her muscles contract in mechanical rhythms that bore no resemblance to natural movement. The third had followed protocols designed for 20-year-old car accident victims, not a 58-year-old executive who'd built her identity around competence and control. A soft knock interrupted his reading. Carmen stood in the doorway holding a cup of coffee, steam rising in the lamplight. "Your mother's settled for the night," she said, setting the cup on the desk beside the scattered papers. "Is there anything else you need?" Tyler looked up at her, really looked for the first time since she'd started working for them. She had the kind of posture that suggested formal training in something, though he couldn't place what. Her movements had a quality that reminded him of dancers he'd seen at charity galas, an awareness of space and balance that seemed ingrained rather than learned. "Carmen," he said, "you spend more time with her than anyone. What do you think about all this therapy?" She paused, clearly weighing her words. "I think your mother needs to want to move before she can learn how to move again." "What do you mean?" "The therapists treat her legs like broken machinery. But she was a person who loved to dance before the stroke. She still moves her shoulders when jazz plays on the radio. She taps her fingers in rhythm. The music reaches parts of her that the exercises don't touch." Tyler stared at the reports spread across the desk. Hundreds of pages of clinical assessments, and none of them mentioned that his mother had once been known for closing down wedding receptions with her dancing, that she'd met his father at a salsa class in Little 5 Points, back when the neighborhood was still rough around the edges. "You think music could help?" Carmen's expression shifted, revealing something she'd kept carefully hidden. "I think rhythm is the language the body remembers, even when everything else gets confused." The next morning, Tyler found himself observing his mother's care routine with new eyes. The day nurse arrived at 9, a competent woman named Beverly, who'd been handling the medical management with professional efficiency. She checked vitals, administered medications, and guided his mother through the prescribed exercises with the kind of clinical detachment that made it easy to forget there was a person inside the patient. "Lift your knee toward your chest," Beverly instructed, supporting his mother's leg through the movement. "Hold for 5 seconds. Now lower slowly." His mother complied with the mechanical compliance of someone who'd learned that resistance only prolonged the ordeal. But Tyler noticed something Beverly missed. When Carmen moved through the room collecting laundry, humming an old Motown melody under her breath, his mother's breathing changed. Her movements became slightly less rigid. Her eyes tracked the rhythm instead of staring at nothing. After Beverly left, Tyler stayed in the living room while Carmen prepared lunch. His mother sat in her usual spot by the windows, but instead of staring outside, she was watching Carmen work. When Carmen reached up to dust a high shelf, stretching in a motion that was both functional and graceful, his mother's right foot moved in a small, involuntary response. "Did you see that?" Tyler asked. Carmen turned from the shelf. "See what?" "Her foot. It moved when you were stretching." They both looked at his mother, who was now self-consciously still, aware of being observed. "It's probably just a spasm," she said, but her voice carried a note of curiosity that hadn't been there in months. Carmen set down her dustcloth and moved closer. "May I try something?" His mother nodded, and Carmen began a slow, reaching motion with her arms, the kind of stretch that seemed to invite the whole body to follow. She hummed the same Motown melody from earlier, letting it fill the space between them. Tyler watched his mother's face change. The guarded expression softened, and her upper body began to mirror Carmen's movement in small, tentative ways. When Carmen lifted one arm and let it flow in a gentle arc, his mother's shoulder followed. When the rhythm shifted, both her feet responded with subtle taps against the wheelchair footrests. "How did you know to do that?" Tyler asked. Carmen stopped moving but kept humming. "Bodies want to dance. Sometimes they just need permission." That afternoon, Tyler cancelled the appointment with the new specialist. Instead, he sat down with Carmen at the kitchen table and asked her to tell him about rhythm and movement and the ways a person's body remembers joy. "If this moment hit you, tap like. It helps more people find these stories." Carmen had grown up in Decatur, the daughter of a mother who cleaned office buildings at night and a father who played bass guitar in church on Sundays. She'd discovered dance the way some kids discover they can run fast or throw far, by accident. and with the sudden recognition that this thing her body could do was different from what other bodies could do. "I was 7, she said, washing vegetables at the sink, while Tyler listened from the breakfast nook. "My mother took me to her job one Saturday because she couldn't find a babysitter. I was supposed to sit still in the lobby, but there was music coming from somewhere upstairs. I followed it and found this dance studio where they were teaching adult classes. I stood in the doorway watching until the teacher saw me. She'd trained at Spellman's dance program, spent summers at intensive workshops in New York, and by her mid-20s was choreographing for local artists and teaching classes in studios around Atlanta. The work paid enough to matter, but not enough to build a life on, especially after her own mother got sick and needed care. I took the housekeeping job because it was steady hours and good pay," she said. "I told myself it was temporary, just until I got back on my feet. That was 7 years ago." Tyler found himself doing math he'd never bothered with before. Carmen was 41, not the younger woman he'd assumed. She'd spent more than a decade building expertise in movement and the human body, then put it aside to clean houses for people who never asked what she'd done before. "You have degrees in this?" "Kinesiology and dance therapy. I kept taking classes even after I stopped performing. Learning never felt like something you could finish." That evening, Tyler asked his mother about the music she'd loved before the stroke. They sat in the living room while Carmen worked in the kitchen, the domestic routine continuing around them in a way that suddenly felt less like background and more like the foundation that made everything else possible. "Your father and I met dancing," his mother said, her voice carrying a warmth that had been absent for months. "This was back when Buckhead had honky-tonks instead of wine bars. I was a terrible dancer, but I was enthusiastic. What happened to that person?" She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers resuming their unconscious drumming against the wheelchair. "She got busy building a life. Then she got sick. Then she forgot she'd ever existed." Tyler reached over and took her hand. "What if we tried to find her again?" The next morning, Carmen arrived to find Tyler had rearranged the living room. He'd moved the furniture to create an open space near the windows and set up a small sound system. His mother sat in her wheelchair at the edge of what looked like an improvised dance floor, wearing an expression that mixed skepticism with curiosity. "What's all this?" Carmen asked. "I was thinking about what you said about bodies wanting to dance," Tyler said. "Maybe we could try some movement therapy, not the clinical kind, the human kind." Carmen looked from Tyler to his mother, to the cleared space that suddenly felt full of possibility and risk in equal measure. "I'm not a licensed physical therapist, but you understand movement in ways they don't." His mother wheeled herself closer to the open area. "What would we do exactly?" Carmen considered the question, then moved to the center of the space. "We'd start with what you already know how to do. Your arms, your shoulders, your core. We'd find the rhythm you remember and let it teach your legs what they're capable of." She reached over to the sound system and started a song Tyler recognized from his mother's old playlist, something with a steady beat that seemed to match the pace of normal breathing. Then she began to move, not in the clinical way of the physical therapists, but with the kind of fluid intention that made movement look like conversation. "Follow whatever feels good," Carmen said to his mother. "No rules, no repetitions to count, just move with the music." Tyler watched his mother's face change as the familiar melody filled the room. Her shoulders began to sway, and her hands started moving in small gestures that seemed to be reaching for something the music promised. When Carmen's movements became bigger, more inviting, his mother's upper body responded with motions that were tentative but unmistakably intentional. "That's it," Carmen said, moving closer to the wheelchair. "Your body remembers this." And it did. His mother's right leg began to move in small bounces against the footrest. Then her left joined in. When Carmen knelt beside the wheelchair and gently guided one foot in a tapping motion, his mother didn't resist. Instead, she leaned forward and let her whole torso follow the rhythm. "Can you feel that?" Carmen asked, supporting his mother's leg in a gentle swinging motion that matched the music's tempo. That's your hip flexor, remembering how to work with your quad. Tyler found himself holding his breath as his mother's movements became more deliberate. This wasn't the passive compliance he'd watched during months of clinical therapy. This was his mother choosing to move, wanting to move, finding reasons in the rhythm to overcome the fear that had kept her still. The song ended, and Carmen helped his mother settle back in the wheelchair. All three of them were breathing harder than the gentle movement seemed to warrant, as if they'd been doing something more strenuous than swaying to music. "How did that feel?" Tyler asked. His mother looked down at her legs, then back up at Carmen. "Like I remember who I used to be." They started meeting every morning at 10, after Beverly finished the medical routine and before the afternoon responsibilities took over. Tyler found himself rearranging his schedule to be present, not as the boss checking on progress, but as someone who was learning alongside his mother. Carmen brought different music each day, testing what reached his mother's body and what left it uninterested. Motown made her arms want to move in sweeping gestures. Jazz made her want to isolate different body parts, shoulders moving independently of hips. Old country made her want to sway side to side, her whole torso following a rhythm that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. Music hits the brain differently than instruction, Carmen explained as they watched his mother respond to a Miles Davis track with subtle head movements and finger snaps. When she hears a familiar song, it activates memories that include how her body used to move. The stroke damaged some pathways, but it didn't erase everything. Tyler began to understand why the traditional physical therapy had failed. The exercises had treated his mother's legs as broken mechanisms that needed to be fixed through repetition and force. But Carmen was treating them as part of a person who needed reasons to want to move again. "Watch this," Carmen said during their second week, starting a song that had been popular when his mother was in college. She positioned herself where his mother could see her clearly, then began moving in a way that suggested the wheelchair user could participate. His mother's response was immediate. Her hands began moving in gestures that matched Carmen's upper body choreography. Her breathing deepened and her spine straightened as she leaned into the rhythm. Then, without any prompting, she reached down and began moving her right leg with her hands, lifting it and letting it bounce in time with the music. "She's self-mobilizing," Tyler said, recognizing the term from the physical therapy reports. "She's dancing," Carmen corrected. "There's a difference." By the third week, his mother was asking for the music sessions. She'd wake up anticipating the 10 o'clock meeting, and Tyler would find her in the living room before they arrived, positioned where the movement space had become a permanent part of the room's geography. Beverly, the day nurse, had noticed the changes. "Her muscle tone is improving," she reported. "Whatever you're doing is working. Her legs have more voluntary control than I've seen since I started coming here." Tyler felt the first flutter of hope that maybe, just maybe, he might have 30 days' worth of measurable results to show the board. But more than that, he was watching his mother become someone he recognized, someone who looked forward to parts of her day instead of just enduring them. "Tell me in the comments what you would have done differently here. I actually read them." The breakthrough came during their fourth week, on a morning when Carmen had brought a playlist of songs from his mother's and father's wedding. Tyler recognized the first track immediately, the song they'd danced to at the reception, back when his mother could move across a dance floor like she was born knowing how. "I haven't heard this in years," his mother said, but her body was already responding, her shoulders finding the rhythm before her mind finished processing the memory. Carmen started dancing to the familiar melody, but this time she moved closer to the wheelchair, extending her hand as if inviting his mother to join her as a partner rather than a patient. "Dance with me," she said simply. His mother took Carmen's hand, and something shifted in the room's energy. Instead of following exercises or copying movements, she began to lead parts of the interaction, pulling Carmen's hand in directions that matched what she was hearing in the music. Her upper body became more fluid, more confident, and her legs began moving in ways that seemed less like therapy and more like an expression of who she'd always been. "Tyler, come here," his mother said, without breaking the rhythm. He joined them in the movement space, taking his mother's other hand. The three of them swayed together to the music that had soundtracked some of the happiest memories his parents had made together. Tyler found himself understanding, for the first time, why his mother had fallen in love with dancing in the first place. "I want to try something," his mother said as the song wound down. "Carmen, can you help me stand up?" Tyler's breath caught. His mother hadn't attempted to stand in months, not since a fall that had shaken her confidence and reinforced everyone's fears about the risks of trying. Carmen moved to the wheelchair and positioned herself where she could provide support. "What feels right to you?" His mother gripped the wheelchair arms and began to shift her weight forward. Carmen supported her from one side while Tyler moved to the other. Slowly, with more effort than it should have taken, but with clear intentionality, his mother rose from the wheelchair. She stood for maybe 10 seconds, swaying slightly to the residual rhythm of the song still playing in her head. Her legs shook with the effort, but they held her weight. When she sat back down, all three of them were grinning like they'd witnessed something impossible. "How did that feel?" Carmen asked. "Like I'm still in here," his mother said, tapping her chest. "Like I'm still me." That afternoon, Tyler called his Uncle Robert and requested a meeting with the board for the following week. He had measurable results to report, but more importantly, he had learned something about leadership that had nothing to do with commanding others, and everything to do with creating conditions where people could discover what they were capable of. The presentation took place in the Blackwood Technologies conference room on a Thursday morning, with 10 board members sitting around a table that had intimidated Tyler since he was old enough to understand what power looked like. His Uncle Robert sat at the head of the table, wearing the expression of someone who expected to be delivering bad news by lunch. "You asked for measurable results," Tyler began, but instead of charts and clinical data, he'd brought his mother and Carmen. His mother entered the conference room in her wheelchair, dressed in the kind of business attire she'd worn when she'd been the one giving presentations in rooms like this. Carmen walked beside her, wearing clothes Tyler had bought her for the occasion, her role transformed from invisible help to acknowledged expert. 18 months ago, my mother suffered a stroke that left her unable to walk," Tyler continued. 3 physical therapists and $15,000 monthly in traditional care produced no improvement in mobility. 4 weeks ago, we tried a different approach. He nodded to Carmen, who started the small sound system they'd brought with them. The music that filled the conference room was the same Miles Davis track that had first made his mother's feet respond with involuntary taps. "Traditional physical therapy treated my mother's legs as broken machinery," Tyler said. "Dance-integrated movement therapy treats them as part of a person who needs reasons to want to move again." Carmen moved to stand beside the wheelchair, and Tyler watched the board members' faces as his mother began to respond to the familiar music. Her shoulders found the rhythm, her hands started moving in small gestures, and her legs began the subtle bouncing motions that had become the foundation of her new relationship with her body. "The results are measurable," Tyler said, reading from notes he'd prepared. 4 weeks ago, my mother couldn't maintain seated balance for more than 30 seconds without back support. Today, she can sit upright for 15 minutes while moving to music. 4 weeks ago, she couldn't lift her legs voluntarily. Today, she can perform knee lifts for 45 seconds continuously. He paused as Carmen helped his mother position her feet flat on the floor, something that had been impossible when the spasticity was at its worst. 4 weeks ago, she hadn't stood up in 6 months. Today, she's going to show you what integrated movement therapy can accomplish. The conference room fell silent, except for the jazz playing softly in the background. Tyler moved to one side of his mother's wheelchair, while Carmen positioned herself on the other. His mother gripped the armrests, took a breath that matched the rhythm of the music, and began to rise. The board members leaned forward as she stood, her legs trembling but holding her weight. She swayed slightly, finding her balance, then took one careful step forward, then another. By the third step, she was moving with the music, each footfall landing in time with the bass line. She walked 8 steps across the front of the conference room before Carmen and Tyler helped her back to the wheelchair. When she sat down, the silence stretched for several seconds before Robert cleared his throat. "How is this possible?" he asked. "Because we stopped treating her condition as a mechanical problem and started treating it as a human one," Tyler said. Carmen developed this approach by combining her background in dance therapy with traditional physical therapy principles. The results speak for themselves. Dr. Sarah Chen, the board member who oversaw the company's healthcare initiatives, was taking notes rapidly. "What's the long-term prognosis?" Carmen spoke for the first time since entering the room. "With continued practice, we expect her to achieve independent transfers from wheelchair to bed and chair within 2 months. Walking distances up to 50 feet, with minimal assistance within 4 months. The key is maintaining the emotional engagement that motivates her to want to keep improving." Tyler watched his uncle's face as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about his mother's recovery. It was about Tyler's capacity to identify unconventional solutions and implement them effectively. More importantly, it was about his ability to recognize expertise that existed outside traditional credentialing systems. "The monthly care costs have dropped from $15,000 to $8,000, Tyler continued. "Carmen's integrated approach requires fewer outside specialists and has eliminated the need for the expensive equipment that wasn't producing results." Board member Janet Walsh, who'd been skeptical of Tyler's leadership from the beginning, raised her hand. "What makes you think this approach could be scaled or replicated?" Tyler looked at Carmen, who'd prepared for this question. "Dance and music therapy for neurological recovery isn't experimental," she said. "It's evidence-based treatment that's been proven effective in clinical settings. What's unusual is applying it in a home environment with personalized music selection and family involvement. The principles are scalable." "Are you proposing we get into the healthcare business?" Robert asked. "I'm proposing we fund research into cost-effective rehabilitation that actually works," Tyler said. "Carmen has developed a methodology that could help thousands of stroke survivors who aren't responding to traditional therapy. We could partner with Emory's neurology department to document and refine the approach." Dr. Chen was nodding as she made calculations on her tablet. "The market for post-stroke rehabilitation is worth billions annually, with high patient dissatisfaction rates and poor outcomes. If this approach is replicable, the social impact could be enormous." Now Tyler felt the momentum shifting in the room. These were business people who understood markets and opportunities, but they were also human beings who just watched his mother walk after 18 months of paralysis. "What would you need to move forward?" Walsh asked. Tyler had anticipated this question and spent the previous week researching realistic timelines and budgets. $500,000 for a 12-month pilot program. Partner with Emory to recruit 20 stroke survivors who haven't responded to traditional therapy. Document everything. Measure outcomes. Build a replicable model. "And Ms. Rodriguez would lead this program?" Robert asked, using Carmen's last name for the first time since Tyler had known either of them. "Carmen would be the program director," Tyler said. "She'd work with physical therapists, neurologists, and researchers to refine the methodology and train other practitioners. This isn't about replacing traditional therapy. It's about expanding what's possible." The vote was unanimous. The board approved the pilot program funding and, more significantly, confirmed Tyler's leadership role without the probationary conditions that had hung over his head for months. But Tyler barely heard the formal resolutions being read. He was watching his mother and Carmen exchange a look that contained months of shared work and mutual respect. After the board members filed out, Tyler's uncle lingered in the conference room. "I owe you an apology," Robert said. "I thought you needed to learn how to manage failure. Instead, you learned how to recognize success in places we weren't looking." Tyler shook his head. "I learned how to listen to people who know more than I do." That evening, Tyler found himself in the kitchen with Carmen, planning the transition from family care to program development. His mother was in the living room, practicing the movements that had become her new daily routine, music playing softly as she worked through exercises that no longer felt like exercises. "Are you sure you want to take on something this big?" Tyler asked. "You could keep working here part-time, and I'd increase your salary to reflect what you've accomplished." Carmen was quiet for a moment, watching Tyler's mother through the doorway. 7 years ago, I put my dreams aside because I thought taking care of people was more practical than changing how people get taken care of. This feels like a chance to do both. What if the program doesn't work? What if we can't replicate what happened here? Then we'll have tried something that mattered, Carmen said, and your mother will keep walking either way. Tyler found himself thinking about the past month, about the difference between inheriting authority and earning it, between managing resources and understanding people. "I never asked what you wanted," he said. "Before all this started, I never asked what you were capable of. Most people don't. That's going to change, starting with an $85,000 salary and full benefits for the program director position." Carmen's eyes widened. "Tyler, that's more than generous. It's what the position is worth. And Carmen, I'm going to need you to teach me everything you know about recognizing people's actual capabilities instead of just their job titles." 6 months later, the Blackwood Emory Integrated Movement Therapy Program had enrolled its first cohort of participants. Tyler's mother was walking independently for distances up to 100 feet and had resumed driving with adaptive controls. Carmen was supervising a team of 5 movement therapists and had been invited to present their preliminary findings at a national conference on stroke rehabilitation. The program's success metrics were encouraging but not miraculous. 60% of participants showed measurable improvement in mobility within 8 weeks. 30% achieved independent walking for short distances. Cost per patient was 40% lower than traditional intensive therapy protocols, and patient satisfaction scores were consistently higher. But Tyler had learned that the most important measurements couldn't be captured in clinical data. They lived in the moment when a 70-year-old man danced with his granddaughter for the first time since his stroke. In the wife who stopped referring to her husband as "my patient" and started calling him by his name again. In the daughter who realized her father hadn't lost his sense of humor. He just needed a reason to share it. Tyler's role in the company had evolved beyond what anyone had expected when the board issued their ultimatum. He'd proven he could lead by solving problems, but more importantly, he'd proven he could lead by creating environments where other people could solve problems. The board had asked for measurable outcomes. Instead, they'd gotten a leader who understood that the most important outcomes often came from measuring the right things. The Buckhead house had changed too. The living room where his mother had spent months staring out windows was now a space where music played most mornings, where movement happened naturally, where the rhythm of recovery had become part of the daily routine. Carmen still came 3 days a week, but now she came as a consultant and friend rather than invisible help. "Do you ever miss the simplicity?" Tyler asked her one morning as they watched his mother lead a video call with other program participants, sharing techniques and encouragement. "I miss being underestimated," Carmen said. "It was easier to exceed expectations when no one had any." Tyler laughed, understanding exactly what she meant. The pressure of high expectations was different from the pressure of low ones, but it came with the satisfaction of knowing that people were counting on your expertise rather than just your availability. His mother finished her call and wheeled over to where they were standing. "The Atlanta participants want to organize a group dance session next month," she said. something public, to show what recovery can look like when it includes joy. "What did you tell them?" Tyler asked. "I told them I knew just the person to choreograph it." Carmen grinned. "I might know someone who could help with that." Tyler watched the two women plan an event that would have been impossible to imagine a year earlier, when recovery had meant enduring therapy rather than embracing possibility. The change hadn't happened because of money or technology or access to better specialists. It had happened because someone had recognized that his mother was still a person who loved to dance, and that knowledge had been more powerful than any medical intervention. The dance event took place on a Saturday afternoon in Piedmont Park, with 23 stroke survivors and their families gathered under a pavilion that overlooked the Atlanta skyline. Carmen had choreographed a routine that accommodated wheelchairs, walkers, and varying levels of mobility, set to music that spanned decades and genres. Tyler stood at the edge of the group, watching his mother move through a sequence that combined the therapeutic exercises she'd learned with the joyful expression of rhythm that had drawn her to dancing in the first place. She wasn't moving the way she had before the stroke, but she was moving in a way that was uniquely hers, adapted to her current capabilities while honoring who she'd always been. The crowd that gathered to watch included family members, medical professionals, and curious park visitors who found themselves witnessing something that felt both ordinary and remarkable. These were people reclaiming parts of themselves that illness had temporarily taken away, doing it together, in public, with music and laughter and the kind of community that forms around shared challenges and shared victories. When the music ended, the applause came not just from the families, but from the broader crowd that had stopped to watch. Tyler found himself thinking about visibility and recognition, about the difference between helping people cope with limitations and helping them discover new possibilities within those limitations. A reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution approached him as the group began to disperse. "This is quite a story," she said. "Young CEO uses dance therapy to help his mother walk again. When can we schedule an interview?" Tyler looked over at Carmen, who was helping participants gather their belongings and make plans for the next group session. "You want to interview the wrong person," he said. "The person who made this happen is over there. Her name is Carmen Rodriguez, and she's the one who understands how recovery actually works." "But you're the one who funded the program." "I'm the one who learned to listen to people who know more than I do. That's not the same thing." The reporter looked confused, as if she'd never encountered someone who wanted to deflect credit rather than claim it. Tyler watched her approach Carmen, who would tell the real story of how the program had developed and why it worked. As families loaded wheelchairs and walkers into cars, Tyler's mother approached him with the expression she wore when she had something important to say. "I'm proud of you," she said, simple words that carried the weight of everything that had changed between them. "I'm proud of you too," he replied, "for never giving up on the person you knew you still were. It's easier to remember who you are when someone else sees it too." Tyler nodded, understanding that this was true for more than just stroke recovery. Leadership, he'd learned, wasn't about having the right answers. It was about creating conditions where the right answers could emerge from the people who actually understood the problems. If you want more true human stories, hit subscribe and stay with us. 6 months after the park event, Tyler received an invitation to speak at a healthcare innovation conference in Chicago. The organizers wanted him to discuss unconventional leadership approaches to complex problems. He'd agreed, but only if Carmen could present alongside him as co-developer of the program model. The conference hall was filled with hospital administrators, insurance executives, and policymakers who were accustomed to hearing about breakthrough technologies and expensive treatment protocols. Tyler and Carmen presented their work as something different, a low-cost, high-touch approach that treated patients as whole people rather than collections of symptoms. The most important innovation wasn't technical, Tyler told the audience. It was cultural. We stopped asking what was wrong with the patient and started asking what was still right with the person. Carmen presented the clinical data that supported their approach, but she also shared stories about individual participants, about the man who'd started cooking again because he could stand safely at the stove, about the woman who'd returned to her volunteer work at the church because she could navigate the building independently. During the question and answer session, a hospital CEO from Dallas asked about scalability. How do you maintain quality when you're training therapists who don't have dance backgrounds? You don't teach them to be dancers, Carmen replied. You teach them to see movement as communication, rhythm as medicine, and joy as a legitimate therapeutic goal. The specific techniques can be learned. The mindset is what makes the difference. After the presentation, Tyler and Carmen were approached by representatives from hospitals in Houston, Miami, and Seattle. The program model was being adapted for use with Parkinson's patients, traumatic brain injury survivors, and elderly residents in assisted living facilities. What had started as a desperate attempt to help one person walk again was becoming a framework for rethinking recovery across multiple conditions. On the flight back to Atlanta, Tyler found himself reflecting on the year that had changed everything. The board's ultimatum had been intended to test his leadership, but it had ended up revealing that leadership wasn't about proving yourself to people who already had power. It was about recognizing the power that already existed in people who hadn't been given the chance to use it. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I just hired another traditional physical therapist? He asked Carmen as they flew over the lights of cities where new programs were being planned. I think your mother would still be sitting by that window, watching the garden grow without her, Carmen said. And you'd still be thinking that money solves problems instead of people solving problems. And you'd still be cleaning houses. And I'd still be pretending that was enough. Tyler looked out the airplane window at the scattered lights below, each one representing someone's home, someone's family, someone's struggles with limitations and possibilities they might not even know they had. When they landed at Hartsfield-Jackson, Tyler's mother was waiting at the gate, standing independently with a walker, wearing the kind of smile that had become common since music and movement had returned to her daily life. She'd driven herself to the airport, something that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. How did it go? She asked as they walked toward baggage claim. 3 new programs approved for funding, Carmen said. 2 more hospitals interested in pilot projects. And a documentary crew that wants to film the Atlanta group for a piece about innovative rehabilitation. Are you going to do it? Carmen looked at Tyler, who nodded. I think it's time people understood that recovery isn't something that happens to you, she said. It's something you choose to do with the right support and the right reasons. They drove home through the familiar streets of Atlanta, past the Waffle House where Carmen had stopped for coffee during her first week of working for the family, past the Emory campus where the research collaboration was producing papers that were changing how neurologists thought about post-stroke intervention, past the park where 23 people had danced their way back to versions of themselves they'd thought were lost forever. Tyler parked in the driveway of the Buckhead house that no longer felt like a monument to his father's success, but like a place where his own version of leadership was being defined daily. As they walked to the front door, he could hear music playing inside, the kind of rhythm that had become the soundtrack of recovery and the foundation of everything he'd learned about recognizing what people were actually capable of achieving. The house was full of the sounds of a life being lived intentionally, music and laughter, and the kind of conversation that happens when people have discovered they're capable of more than they'd believed possible. Tyler stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to his mother and Carmen plan the next day's session with a participant who was learning to walk again after a car accident. This was what leadership looked like when it was working properly. Not commanding from a distance, but creating space for people to discover and use their own expertise. not solving problems for others, but building systems where the right solutions could emerge from the people who understood the problems best. Tyler had inherited a company worth billions of dollars, but the most valuable thing he'd learned couldn't be measured in quarterly reports or stock prices. He'd learned that the most important question a leader could ask wasn't, "How do I fix this?" but, "Who already knows how to fix this, and how do I make sure they have what they need to do it?" The board's ultimatum had given him 30 days to prove himself. Instead, he'd spent a year learning that proving yourself wasn't the point. Creating conditions where everyone could prove themselves was the point. And in a world full of problems that money couldn't solve, that difference made all the difference in the world.